That whole business of living at the whim of another human being. Watching out, whoa, so carefully for the moods, the sensitivities on the great man's face. Well, that was terribly appealing to all those delicate, melting, idealistic young girls who were always hanging around, or the serious young men in their dark overcoats, but God knows not to me. I mean, of course he was remarkable. Who would have denied it? It was remarkable simply to make all the choices he made, to dress in blues and greens and not reds or grays, to know about the Sumerians, but not about the Assyrians. Sure, it was great. Although, if you actually thought about it, it was all sort of arbitrary, really, in a way. Why blues rather than reds, you see? I mean, there was no answer. I would say to myself every day, oh, he's accomplished so much, and I've accomplished nothing. So I really don't deserve to lick his boots. But I couldn't help it. It did bother me that all those wonderful choices that sort of made up the very fabric of Howard were at their foundation really sort of mindless. But of course I envied him. What are you talking about? I envied the whole gang of them. All the old unbearables. Bob, Arthur, the whole crowd. And Howard, come on. The possibility of not envying Howard didn't even arise. It didn't even arise. Forget his writing. I envied him simply because of the way he could read. It was so easy, casual. The way I might have picked up an article about the latest approach to cooking string beans, he would pick up a book of poems by John Donne. I mean, I was clever enough to know that John Donne was offering something that was awfully enjoyable. I just wasn't clever enough to actually enjoy it. I devoted my life to it, I suppose you could say, but I couldn't get near to the great writers. Day after day and year after year, I read them and read them, but they always seemed remote. I didn't want them to, they just did. I was kept out of it all. Kept away. Howard, on the other hand, was let right in. Come in, they said. Come talk. Come be with us. We're right here. Howard couldn't even comprehend what the problem was for the rest of us poor mortals. How could he, you see? But do you know, I always felt I was on the brink of understanding. I felt I could have learned. I was ready to learn. I would have humbled myself to any degree in order to learn, as a matter of fact. But he wouldn't teach me. None of them would. Howard, Judy, Bob, Arthur, the readers of poetry.
Jack wasn't actually a bad fellow, I just found him a little bit vague at times. A little bit vague. A little bit lazy. He was lazy, in fact. Actually, he was so lazy that his favorite foods, I'm not making this up because I observed it quite carefully, were soup, risotto, mashed potatoes, and ice cream. I'm not exaggerating.
God, I enjoyed watching Howard's reactions when Judy and I had just met and I first started coming over to the house. You see, the thought of Judy and me being alone together was so horrifying to Howard that he would actually sort of follow us around from room to room without knowing he was doing it. I mean, literally for hours at a time, he'd be sort of creeping and crawling around just like some strange animal, his face frozen into this hideous little smile. You see, at that time I happened to be living quite nearby. I had a tiny apartment in one of those famous, awful, cylindrical high-rises. And fairly often, Judy and I would sort of spend the evening together in my falling-apart bed with a bottle or two of something or other. And then we'd be hungry. And as I never had any food at my place, we'd get up, throw on a few clothes, and sneak very quietly into Howard's house to raid the refrigerator. Judy's face would be bright red, and she'd constantly be bursting out into that weird hysterical laugh she used to have then, and half-heartedly trying to muffle it. And when Howard would appear, in his slippers with his special little smile, you could tell he found our whole manner just crassly obscene. Of course, the comical part was that I happened to know, and Howard didn't, that I wasn't actually a good lover at all. God, no, I was really awful. I had no control over my own responses. I used to remind myself of my college friend Jorge, who had this pet lemur which he kept on a leash and which was always leaping up at people unexpectedly or else lying down in some public place and refusing to budge. And I always used to think about Jorge's apologetic expressions and gestures. Anyway, women had always told me, you're not sensitive. You're very clumsy. The way you approach a woman's body is simply wrong. One woman had said, wrestling is really not the right model. Try something else. But Judy knew absolutely nothing about sex, so she didn't mind. It all seemed great. Needless to say, I never pointed out to her, Christ, if you like me, you should try a man who can really do this. She was terribly happy. So we really spent years actually almost living over there in Howard's house, and it wasn't that bad. But then things got so much nicer when we finally moved to our own little apartment entirely on the other side of town from Howard. We moved in April, and we had a little window. And from the tree outside, the leaves grew into the window in the most irresistible, voluptuous, sexual way. And Judy and I grew sort of intertwined, getting up each morning with just the two of us. It was a wonderful time. Well, do I need to tell you it was a short interval? Good Lord. Let's try to be realistic. Howard, after all, was in very poor health. He was much too sick. He was much too ill. He couldn't be expected to live by himself without Judy and me in the next room. And what possible value could our happiness have in comparison to how seriously ill he was? He was so ill. The trouble was that no one could ever say in just what way he was ill, what was wrong with him exactly. He certainly had some awfully good days for someone who was so ill. For example, those who saw him on the day when he carried the logs from the garage to the house would probably be unlikely ever to forget it. Up and down the driveway, sweat pouring off in sheets from his face, refusing, rudely, all offers of help. His eyes shining yellow like the eyes of a wolf. You see, during all those years, the only times I could ever pull Judy totally away from Howard were when we'd go on a trip. When we'd go to one of those awful places Judy loved. One of the miserable places. Tropical nightmare zones. And those trips were so nice, really. Because no matter how sad or wistful Judy might have seemed before we left, well, introduce her to a shepherd or a couple of sheep, and she'd perk right up.